Okay, hello. Welcome to today's NCFE Provider webinar on preparing students for the T-Level Employer Set project. If you haven't already done so, please pop something in the chat box to let me know you can hear us okay. You'll find the chat box at the bottom of the webinar control panel at the right-hand side of your screen. We are aware that the current government COVID restrictions mean that assessment for technical education is undergoing consultation, and we are waiting for guidance from Ofqual, but we're going to deliver this session as is currently planned, based on the T-level external assessments running in the summer, as we're currently expecting. We encourage questions from you all, and in these trying times especially, no question is a silly question. If we're not able to answer any of the questions today, we'll follow them up afterwards with our NCFE colleagues. All questions and answers included in the chat box today will be saved and shared with you all after the session. I will be asking you to share your ideas and answers to questions in the chat box, so please ensure that your settings allow people to see your answers, and I'll be saving the chat box anyway. The session is being recorded to enable other colleagues who can't make it today to access it. Okay, if you haven't met me, my name's Helen Scanlon. I'm Curriculum Officer for T-Levels for NCFE. My role is to support centres through the planning, onboarding and CPD processes for the NCFE cash qualifications, with a focus on promoting and advancing learning, helping to create a fairer and more inclusive society. Today's CPD session is related to supporting students in their preparation for the core T-level Employer Set project. From now on, we'll call it the ESP. I've got nearly 30 years of teaching experience. I've worked in a range of settings from pre-entry up to master's level. I've delivered and assessed vocational subjects. I'm a maths and English specialist, and I've supported the professional development of teachers for over 15 years now. I've worked with Ofsted inspectors on many occasions. I'm also joined today by Janet King, one of our T-level sector managers and the subject specialist for education and childcare. Janet should be able to answer any subject-specific questions which are asked. Hello, Janet. Welcome. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Oh, thanks, Helen, and hello, everyone. Very pleased to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. So the outcomes and objectives of today, we're going to explore the requirements of the ESP. You're going to discuss and explore how to best prepare students for success. Most importantly, you're going to share good practice, and we're going to allow for some questions about the ESP. The session is 1 hour in duration. It may run over like we did on Tuesday, but we will work as fast as we can. We will have a range of activities, sharing of ideas and experiences, a big part of today will be on you sharing your ideas, questions and experiences. So in a summary, the questions being recorded and the link will be made available to the recording afterwards. Any questions not answered today will be followed up with the relevant staff members after the event. And please remember that questions are encouraged. All sound settings, please on mute to avoid background noise and feedback until we get into the break rooms where we'll need to unmute to talk to each other. An evaluation form will be deployed on completion of this webinar, and we do ask you to complete this short survey to help us to improve and develop our CPD offer. Okay, we're going to dive right in now and start with a quiz about the Employer Set project. This will introduce some of the important points and assess your starting points. Please choose an answer for each of the questions and we'll run through the answers afterwards with you. I'm just going to launch the quiz, and then I'm just going to follow up with somebody who's having problems with their sound settings. So just another minute or two. I'll see people are starting to submit the quiz answers. So thanks for that. As I say, I'm just following up with somebody saying that she's having problems with sound. I'll leave the quiz open for a bit longer yet. We're nearly halfway submitted, so thanks to those who've already submitted their answers. We'll just give it a bit longer, give everyone the chance to run through all the questions, and then we'll go through the answers. Well, about another 20 seconds or so, and then I'm going to close the quiz. So just please pop your answers in. They're either multiple choice or true or false. And if any of the quiz questions have posed any questions for yourselves, if anything's been highlighted that you want to know more about, please pop it in the chat box. It's encouraged all questions. So just waiting for the last few people to do the quiz submission. And then, as I say, we'll run through the answers. Okay, I'm going to be closing the quiz now, so we'll have a run through all of the answers for them. Just waiting for the answers to load up. Just give me a second. We're just waiting for the wonders of the internet to get it up. Right, there we go. So question 1. The tutor guidance materials can be shared with students. No, not at all, they can't. And I think it's pretty clear on there that it does say don't share these. There's information there in that would or could undermine the actual real assessment. So yes, don't share the tutor guidance materials. Question 2, the player set project will not change over time. That is false because it will change over time. Janet, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah. Oh,
Are you okay?
sorry, Helen. Yes, I'm okay. It's just that somebody's just arrived at the door. Would you believe it? So we were going. I'm going to be joined by the dog. It's good timing. Anyway, yes. So the apologies, everyone. So the scenarios themselves will change at each cohort, at each submission. And therefore the questions around that and the pre-brief, of course, will change. What will be familiar is the intention that there'll always be a scenario for early years, there'll always be a scenario for assisting teaching, and therefore there'll always be the intention that the familiar pattern, the features of the ESP will remain in place, but the scenarios and questions therefore may be obviously subject to change.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Janet. Question 3, how many hours is the ESP planned for? It's planned for 12, but those are the supervised hours. There will be hours outside of that, on top of that, that we'll explain in this session today. Question 4, the ESP is conducted under supervised conditions. Yes, it is. The ESP external assessment material is given to students, and that was a case of when is it? And it's at the first supervised assessment session. That was answer C. Question 6, the time for students to complete the SP can be increased by using, and of course it's the reasonable adjustments and special consideration policies. Although under the consultation, the time for the students may be one of the things that gets adapted or changed. How many main tasks are there in total? There are 4 main tasks in total, and I'll talk about those shortly. Question 8, in preparing for the peer and group discussion, the students must work independently. Yes, that's true, they must. Question 9, students who've completed task 1 can move straight on to task 2. No, they can't, and we'll talk about that shortly. And then question 10, in task 3, teachers should make a judgment about the students' verbal communication skills. And the majority of you got that right. Yes, it's true, they do. So we'll talk about that as well shortly. So brilliant. Thank you so much for answering those questions. We'll move on. Okay, many thanks for your answers there. If anything we've said so far has created further questions or queries, please remember to add them to the chat box so we can provide an answer or log it to take to one of our colleagues. We're going to make reference to the ASP support materials, and they can be found in the materials section of this webinar. I'm going to hand over to Janet for the rest of this slide, however.
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. So what we can see here of the overarching aims and intentions of the employer set project, and where we've actually worked, so where NCF ECASH have worked with employers in terms of those scenarios and meeting those requirements. So when you first look at the terminology, you know, employer set project, it can give the impression that this is something that's set by the employers, and in reality, the employer will check and read through and verify the scenarios that we produce. So it's very much about partnership working, but it's not something that should rely on placement. It's not something that is going to be developed with your own individual placement providers. This is set by us in partnership with employers to make sure that these are reliable, real situations that may occur in either early years or supporting teaching and learning type environments for teaching assistants. It's very much about an application of knowledge and skills. So this employer-set project is actually going to be delivered and submitted at the end of that core year. So it is very much associated with those 12 elements within the core. It is therefore not relying on placement experience, although in a technical vocational qualification, we do appreciate that that is always a good thing to have under your belt, although challenging times we're in with regard to that at the moment. It's an application of the knowledge. So in the exam, we're having that recall, we're looking at understanding, and here in the employer set project, we're very much looking for an application of that. So how would you use that knowledge in a real life situation? Throughout the core, there'll be reference made to core skills. So you can see them written down there, those 4 core skills that are relevant to the assessment within the employer set project. So there is opportunities for students to visit those 4 core skills throughout the employer set project.
Lovely, thanks, Janet. I'll take over again. You're a star.
Thank you.
Right, we're now going to run through the requirements and scenarios for the ESP. On the basis that to effectively prepare students for the ESP, we must first prepare the teachers. So the next few slides are going to be focused on doing this. The first table here shows the weightings of the assessment objectives, and these are identical for both specialisms. The next table here shows the pre-release material. This is provided to the students in the EYE specialism, and this should inform the students' research. The area I've highlighted with the red circle here, students will need to pick out the information from that, the important information that they're going to need. For example, the expected, and for this example, the expected level of progress at different ages, the role of the key worker in this context, how their support role would be influenced, and how they might focus their practice to support the child. It would probably also be useful for the student to review what information is missing from this scenario and how missing information might be relevant. The bullet point list below here is also useful, and students can use this information to also guide their research. This next set of information would be provided at the start of the first formal supervised assessment session. It is the start of the instructions for the actual ESP, and it's also accompanied by more detailed information about the child and the scenario. This second slide shows the same information as the previous slide, but for assisting teaching. The same questions I raised for the EYE scenario would be relevant here in relation to what's there, what's missing, what would be guiding the research on the pre-release activity. And if you plan to keep the samples, these are from the sample assessments, if you plan to keep these as mocks, then I would recommend using the structure of the ESP to inform any practice work you do with your students. I will talk about that as we progress as well. Okay, we're now going to move into an outline of the assessment activities for the ESP. To support centre staff to effectively support their students, we thought we'd start with a run through of the structure of the ESP. I am going to provide a more simplified summary of the process and expectations for both teachers and students after this slide. Please remember to add any questions in the text box as we run through the slide. So the 12-hour project is made up of 4 distinct tasks, some of which contain multiple elements. This slide has an overview of the task, starting with the student research-based activity that will be based on that pre-release project information. Student research should be focused around collating information and materials that they've received during their programme of learning throughout their qualification. And that can include any information pertinent to the contextualised version of the assessment, for example, the early years foundation stage. The information students collate should be refined and focused around the details within the pre-release activity ahead of the supervised scheduled assessment. The pre-release activity can be shared with students 3 weeks before the first supervised assessment session, which should only be scheduled to take place within the relevant assessment series window. Another important point to make here is that students must submit their research materials to their tutor before the cohort's first supervised session, and at least 1 week before that, to allow the tutor to have time to review it, give it back to the student so they can amend it if required. Students should not have access to the project tasks until the research materials have been approved by their tutor. Please check the tutor guidance for more information about this. So task 1A requires the students to create an early support or intervention plan based on the pre-released information and the project brief. This is completed under supervised conditions and will be completed using the students' prepared notes from their research. They will not be allowed access to the internet or any additional materials during this time. There is a time limit of 3 hours for this task, and the outcome of this activity would be a word processed plan. Then move on to task 1B, and it requires the students to produce an activity plan based on the plan produced for task 1A. Again, this task is to be completed under supervised conditions and under the same restrictions related to the internet and additional materials as task 1A. The time allowed for this task is also 3 hours, and the outcome of this would be a word processed activity plan. The timings for both these tasks cannot be split into smaller chunks. And as part of these plans, students should also plan and manage how they'll spend their time on the employer set project work in order to produce what is outlined in the evidence requirements. The next task is based on student group discussion and peer review. For 2A, students must not start this task until all students in the cohort have completed task 1. Tutors will assign students to peer discussion groups, and each group should be made up of 3 to 5 students. You might need to consider the room or the space available and cohort sizes when determining the number of students within a group, and you'll also need to keep this manageable and ensure that group sizes are appropriate. For task 2A part 1, the students are asked to review each other's activity plans produced in task 1B. They will prepare for this discussion activity by completing a pro forma preparation for peer discussion, which you'll find in the materials section for this webinar. Tutors will need to give students printed versions of the relevant task 1B activity plans for each student in their peer group, along with copies of the preparation for peer discussion pro formas. This pro forma must be completed under supervised conditions, and students must work independently. All completed forms should be handed to the tutor, who will be asked to review the completed forms to ensure there is sufficient detail to allow access to peer feedback during the actual discussion. Verbal feedback to students can be provided if there are areas for development, but advice regarding the specific omissions of improvement should not be given. So guidance here could include questions or comments such as, you haven't said why you think that aspect of the plan worked well. Your question doesn't relate to how and why the others designed their plans the way they did, or how do you think that would improve the plan? The student should then revise and redraft as appropriate before handing it back to the tutor for another review. There's no time limit for this part of the task. Moving on to 2A part 2, the students then actually carry out the group discussion about their activity plans. Students will have hard copies of their group's activity plans and their own completed pro forma, but it's important to note here that they will not be allowed to make any changes to their plan during this time. There is a 20-minute supervised preparation time to allow the students read through each other's plans and formulate ideas and feedback on each one for the others in their group. During this discussion, tutors are required to ensure that every student participates and provides feedback. This might mean providing some prompts, so tutors may need also to have copies of the forms available to themselves too. Each student will have a maximum of 5 minutes to present their plan. Then each student is to provide feedback and discuss the presenter's plan. Notes related to this discussion and feedback should be taken and recorded on the pro forma by each student. For task 2B, the students review the feedback they've received and then they can make changes to improve their own activity plan. This must be completed under supervised conditions and within 1 hour. For task 3A, students will use their early support plan and updated activity plan to prepare for a discussion with their tutor. The students should have no more than 2 hours to prepare for this, and then the beginning of the discussion should cover both plans. A pro forma is also provided to support planning for this. The tutor will then ask questions about the plans, and this will last no longer than about 10 minutes. In task 3B, the tutor should take the role of a workplace supervisor, for example, a key worker or teacher, and have a professional discussion about the approach the student took, exploring the rationale behind it. This role play type activity also requires the tutor to assess the student's verbal communication skills. The tutor can ask prompt questions, but they should not offer suggestions or introduce any new information. This is to support the student's evaluative and reflective skills in readiness for the next and final task. Example questions tutor might use are contained in the tutor guidance document, which, as I said earlier, can be found in the materials section for today. And then finally, for task 4, the student will work under supervised conditions to reflect on the tasks and review their project work in relation to the project brief. And they're allowed up to 2 hours for this task. So any times I've said in amongst that section, those times make up the 12 hours in total. But I'm now going to show you the visual simplified version of what I've just been talking about. And this is a step-by-step guide for students. So we start off with individual research based on those pre-release materials. They then use that to create an early support or intervention plan based on the extra information they get in the project brief. They then create an activity plan based on the project brief and their plan from task 1A. So that's all of task 1. Task 2, they then complete the preparation for peer discussion and review each other's plans. They then submit the review and their activities plans and amend them with feedback from the tutor if required. They then actually have the discussion with their peers about each other's activity plans, and then they reflect on any feedback they've received. You then move on to the task 3, where they're going to prepare for a discussion with the teacher, and there's the pro forma for that again. After that, they're going to have that discussion, and I call it a role play type format, professional discussion in a specific role. And then task 4 is the reflection. Yes, Leslie, you will get access to all these slides when we're finished. So that visual overview might provide a useful guide for your students, but we do have a more detailed one for tutors that Janet is now going to run through, and I'm going to dive onto the chat box and answer questions while you do this, Janet.
Okay, thank you. So the first thing that you'll need to do, obviously, is book students onto that relevant version using the NCFE portal. So make sure that students are registered for their employers led project in good time. There is guidance around, you know, do we go early years? Do we go assisting teaching? And can we change that? And up to what time can we change that? So those are all things that have been raised and questions that will be added to the frequently asked question documentation. So we've booked our students on, what do we do next? Okay, so we provide the pre-release activity, and that's available to students 3 weeks before the first supervised session. So students have that time to be able to collate useful evidence and information based on this pre-release activity. It's very important that you collect the students' research and you do take some time to look at that. So this is where you'll be able to suggest, okay, you know, you've looked at the national curriculum, but you're actually going to be answering questions around the early years foundation stage. I know it's a very weak example that, but you can guide to make sure that students do have the information that they need. So check and verify the research materials. Are they in line with the requirements? Are they going to allow opportunity? Are you going to allow an opportunity for amends if needed? So, you know, these students need to know that whatever they take in these notes, these 4 pages of notes, that that information is the only information they'll be taking in and using as reference material. Do they have what they need? And knowing now, reflecting on those tasks, you know, there's going to be elements of reflection. So have the students got information that's going to help them to cover the scope, and you can guide in that way. And then it begins. So there are 12 hours, and for most of these tasks, there is a time constraint given to you to support you with those 12 hours. So under supervised conditions, and what students will do then is begin the early support intervention plan. So they will have the project brief, and they will have the scenario, away they go. Remember, at the end of each of these individual tasks, it will be your job to collect all the materials, including those 4 pages of those notes that the students collated at the beginning. So all materials and documents must be collected from the students. If you're used to doing any extended or external assessment under supervised conditions, that will be something that you're familiar with. So moving on to task 1B, another 3 hours you'll see has been allocated to this, and again supervised conditions. So the creation of an activity plan based on the project brief and the early support or intervention plan from task 1A. So in task 1A, the students have got their head around what is this scenario about, what are the complications or issues, what do I need to be thinking about, and in task 1B, we're putting that sort of child-centered approach there through the creation of an activity plan. Again, just to remind you, it's very important to collect all those materials and documents from the students for validity, reliability, and so on, and to make sure that the assessment is not threatened. So task 1A and task 1B, all around the planning. When we move over to task 2 and the different subtasks within that, we're looking predominantly at discussion. It's important to note that all students must have completed the required task 1 to be able to move on to that discussion. because the discussions are all based around those plans. So your job will be to assign students to peer discussion groups, and those have been kept quite neat and tidy, 3 to 5, so small groups, to manage those peer discussion groups. Again, we're looking at supervised conditions, and students will review each other's activity plans and complete the preparation for peer discussion forms. So then you will need to review the completed preparation for peer discussion and provide feedback. Then there's a period to review those amended forms. And then we begin to supervise in this sub-criteria of task 2A, you will supervise the discussion, that peer group discussion about each other's activity plans. And your role will be to ensure that everyone participates. You'll notice that there's no time being allocated to this. In the next sub-criteria of task 2A, you will complete tutor notes, the tutor observation notes form for each student. And then supervise the student reflection on the feedback and updating of their own activity plans. So it becomes an independent piece of work. And again, now we come back to the allocated time. So there's an hour being allocated for that, for students to work independently on any amends that they wish to make based on the discussions that they've had with their peers. Moving on to task 3, we are extending that element now. We're sticking with the theme of discussion. So we've planned, we're now discussing. We've looked at peer discussion. We're moving on to tutor discussion. And in 3A, you'll provide students with their plans and the tutor discussion pro forma. Under supervised conditions, students will prepare then for a discussion with you about their plans, and they're going to have 2 hours for this. And then comes the discussion, and this Helen was referring to as a role play. So we're looking at the key person in the early years to be able to create that sort of contextualization, and also the teaching assistant in the case of the assisting teaching scenario. And that's really to help that contextualization and to bring that scenario alive through the discussion. For task 3B, the second part of this will be to complete forms for each student and review the communication skills, making a judgment against the descriptors. There are points and scores available for that. In task 4, this is a reflection. So the students will reflect on the outcome of their work in relation to the project brief. And they have a maximum of 2 hours to do that. So we're planning, we're discussing with peers, amending, discussing with tutors in a role play type situation, and then we're reflecting on our work from a student perspective.
Thanks, Janet. We've got some really good questions coming through, which we can pick up later, because we've got one more slide to do in relation to preparing the students, and then we'll go to the questions in the chat box. Okay, thanks a lot, Janet. We've already mentioned some of the strategies which could be used to prepare students for this assessment activity. Let's now spend a little bit of time focused on this. And please keep your questions and comments coming in the chat box. And as I say, we'll talk about them when I finish this slide. So research shows that practicing improves success. So exploring the type of activities the students will be asked to complete in the industry would be a good place to start. It might be that we could maximize the options for this by sharing scenarios, etc. with each other, possibly something we could explore in discussion activity later. We've got a sample ESP, so we could create activities for students to complete which mirror the sample. On a more generic note, we could also explore project planning with students and discuss how to manage their time for this type of project. Looking at, analysing and evaluating written plans would be useful to do. In groups, pairs and individually, exploring what makes a good activity plan would be useful. And although this assessment activity is designed to assess knowledge, any real examples from placements and discussion of their success would help the students put the theory into practice. Pairing students up to share placement experience in preparation for this might also help too. We already have the pro forma, so students can practice completing them. That would be useful too. You could also have some completed examples for discussion and review with models of good and bad practice to develop the students' understanding of what's going to be expected of them. So group discussions is already something we've also mentioned about, something a lot of centres do already to support learning, but having specific discussions which mirror the ESP are going to be useful in building the students' skills and confidence for this. Have some fun with the role play here, with students acting as the tutor and vice versa for some of them. And then moving on to giving and receiving feedback. In consultations, I know centres are working on this with their students, and I would suggest that having specific feedback input related to the ESP and using example plans, etc., already mentioned, would also be useful. And I know reflective practice is included in the core content, so an extension of the learning activities being facilitated to include specifics related to the ESP tasks are going to be useful here. Students could carry out a practice ESP and then use different models of reflection to consolidate the learning and develop their confidence. Which brings me to my final point here. Consider how much support or guidance is required for your students to be objective and evaluative. Confidence in these areas generally comes with experience, so teachers may need to plan specific activities which supports the development of skills and confidence levels in this area. Being objective, supporting students to not give or take criticism personally, or phrasing their feedback to each other in a positive and professional manner might be something some or all of your students would benefit from. Practice here in a safe and supported learning environment might be needed and really useful. I'm going to ask Janet to do the miscellaneous ones from a subject-specific perspective.
Thanks, Helen. I think the only things that I would mention here are just a reminder that when we look at the employer set project the first time, there are 4 tasks, and the subtasks may, when you look at them, and if you're looking at them for the first time, they may not appear very straightforward. If you look at the pro formas that go with that, so help that's available through those forms, for example, that will help to consider those different subtasks and the things that the students need to do, especially when it comes to tasks involved in task 2 and task 3 along the discussion. So looking at what I would suggest, if you are looking at the employer set project and you're trying to get your head around it a little bit, then I would look at it per section, per task, if you like, and then with the pro formas with you alongside, so that you can see that's happening. These are the forms, and the forms will prompt and guide as to the content of it, and things begin to fall into place. That's certainly I think quite helpful when you're looking at things and trying to get your head around it. The other thing I'll reiterate is the placement, and the fact that placement, we know, has been incredibly challenging at this moment in time, and therefore students are unlikely to have had significant, if any, placement time. Just to reassure you that this is a test of the core. This is a project that aligns with those core 12 elements. So it's applying the knowledge in a practical situation. It's not reliant on placement. But the ideas that Helen has suggested there in terms of preparation really will help your students to prepare. So scenarios, practical life situations that you can pull together are really going to help. We know technical vocational qualifications students benefit tremendously from their placement experience, or else it wouldn't be part of it, and such an integral part, and always has been in early years and childcare. So we're appreciative of that. but this should not hold your student back from doing well with the employer set project. Thank you, Helen.
Lovely, thanks a lot, Janet. Well, what I'm going to propose we do now is, rather than go into separate rooms, stay together, because some of the questions that are coming through the chat box, I think everybody would benefit from us discussing and coming up with some feedback and guidance on. So I have answered some already in the chat box, which I'll come back to later. But we've got some questions coming in, Janet, that are very specific and really good questions. So, for example, if someone's supervising a discussion, are they allowed to get another member of staff to cover them, or would there need to be two of us supervising? I know that's something that came up on Tuesday. Centres are talking about having two members of staff supervising the group discussions. Did you have any chat about that, Janet, on Tuesday?
That didn't come up in any of our chat rooms, but it is a good point in terms of invigilation, in terms of supervised conditions, which I think this is what you're referring to in this question. It's probably something that we would need a definitive answer from assessment. I'm not trying to duck the question, but I wouldn't want to give an answer that could be.
So we'll take that back
right,
to assessment design.
Yeah,
and
let's
ask.
take
Yes,
that back.
absolutely. And another good point that Kay's raised in task 3A, her students have been using the headers on the pro forma and creating a PowerPoint presentation to support their presentation. So I've said, really good idea. I'll double check that was okay. It doesn't say they can't use a PowerPoint. I think anything that would help them base their presentation of their plan on would be great, but I'm going to double check that. We've also been asked about the 3 hours.
That should be fine.
You know, the two sets of three. Yes, it should be, shouldn't it? The 2 sets of 3 hours for task 1A and 1B. Are the students allowed a break in that? Because 3 hours is a long time to be spending on working on it. My gut feeling is, because it's supervised, they wouldn't be able to go for a break at the same time, because they could chat about what they're doing outside of that supervised session. So it's, supervised conditions is very close and similar to exam conditions. So we'll double check that, but my gut feeling would be no. What would yours be, Janet?
Yes, I would agree, Helen. I think it is a long time, but I don't think we could put an authorised break in that. Having said that, if individuals need a comfort break, etc., then of course that must be allowed.
Yeah, I would agree. We've had a question about the 3 weeks prior to the window. There's going to be a clash with Easter. Easter holidays are going to be within that 3-week window for some areas, so we're going to have to check that for everybody. A question for you, I think: do students have access to the EYFS or national curriculum at the planning time, for example, in task 1? They'll have notes from it, won't they?
Yeah, it is a good question, and your students will need to look within that time period, in that pre-release, in that 3 weeks, to think about the pre-release brief. How old is this child? And that will give an indication of the information you need to collect. So if we're talking EYFS, if we're talking about a child of 3, then that information needs to be gathered at that point.
Lovely, thank you. And Gemma's raised a really good question, something we've spoken about. What happens if a student is off sick within the time period?
Yep, good question, and it does happen, doesn't it? Absolutely, is going to happen. It's on the card. So, and there are lots of reasons why that time period may be interrupted. So, you will be able to refer to the special considerations policy and the guidance around that, and we'll be able to support you then with the next step for that student.
Brilliant. So from Lorraine, from the supervised sessions, do we need an invigilator, or can it be tutor supervision with adequate spacing in the room?
I think it's worth double checking, but
Yeah.
the technical qualifications that we currently have do allow for the tutor to be the person who's doing the supervision. So I see no reason for that to change under these circumstances, but I guess we should doubly confirm it, Helen, but I would say it can be the tutor.
Yeah, and I have got some general information from the assessment requirements policy. It doesn't actually state that they can or can't, but I'll make sure that those sections are also shared with everybody related to supervised conditions and what that actually means. So, Tracy, will the discussion need to be video or voice recorded for moderation purposes? What a good question, Tracy. Do you know, Janet?
It's a good question. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be audioed, but there does need to be obviously a record of that. But and by the same token, it doesn't dispute the fact if you wanted to record it in that way that you could, but you couldn't. So I think you've got the option, but not the insistence.
Lovely, thank you. And then Leslie's got another good question. Where does the tutor and student discussion take place? Does it need to be away from other students? I would have thought yes.
Yes, absolutely. So almost a little bit like an individual sort of tutorial where you've got that time just for that student would make the best sense. Although appreciate the logistics of that for you.
Absolutely. And Dawn and a couple of others have asked about the templates for the activity plans. Is that something we've talked about this recently, haven't we?
Yeah, so all pro formas should now be with their associated examples. If they're not, and we can check that, Helen, things sometimes are taken down to be reviewed and revised. So if they're not, then we can chase that. But I find when I was looking at the employer set project, looking at it as one big cake, as it were, I was having to read it over and over. But when I looked at it, task pro forma, it started to make a little bit more sense to me. So I'm just passing that on as good advice. But we'll check all the pro formas are there, because that'll only work if they're available. Absolutely.
Absolutely, absolutely. Another one from Tracy. When presenting their plans, do students carry out a formal presentation, or can they present in other ways? It's similar to the question we had earlier, isn't it? And they definitely don't have to do a formal presentation using PowerPoint, but they can if they want to, was our understanding, but we'll check.
I would agree with that. I think there's an opportunity to present formally, and there's the opportunity for it to be, I guess, less formal, but to meet the criteria.
Yeah, excellent. And Kay, really good point. So that she said that they would assume that they would need an invigilator to safeguard themselves against any claims or complaints. And I would say it's really, really good practice if you double up to be sure.
Yeah, I understand and completely understand where that's coming from. So with that, so it is a really good point. I just think we need to just double check, and we don't want to make it too onerous, but at the same time, I get the safeguarding and all of that. So let's double check it, Helen.
Yeah, sure. Dawn's asking if staff need a comfort break and another person take over. I've just checked what we've got about the about anything like that, and it says invigilators must be vigilant, remain aware of incidents or emergent situations, looking out for malpractice or candidates who, for example, maybe feel unwell or require a toilet break. These incidents must be recorded in an incident log. I would say it's exactly the same for if the staff needed a break. That as long as it's recorded in an incident log and somebody else takes over the supervision, that should be okay. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, lovely. Dawn, we were thinking of 2 staff members. Yeah, that would be really good. Ruth.
Ideal.
Yes, it's being recorded, Ruth. Sorry, yes, we have recorded. I didn't notice you came in late, and thank you for coming. I know how precious time is at the moment. Next question from Gemma. It'd be very hard to collect information from EYFS in pre-release time. Will the area need to plan, for example, SLC shown in the pre-release form? And is it true only 2 pages of notes can be taken in total from the pre-release? We believe it's 4 pages in total, don't we, Janet?
4 pages in total. There should be a signpost and an indication of the information that's required from either the foundation stage framework or from the national curriculum as appropriate. But on those 4 pages of notes, then information needs to be collated, and that really was for equity of accessibility, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And there are guidelines in the tutor guidance about how many pages and font size, etc., etc. But people can maximise the use of those 4 pages, being very careful about what they use, can't they? Yeah. So Leslie does say, hence the need for another member of staff for support. Yes, I totally agree. Kay, we haven't been given pro formas for templates for the support plan activity plan, so we will follow that up. It's not online currently unless I'm missing. We'll have a look. We will have a look and share.
Okay.
So Dawn, can it be different tutors who do the discussions as one tutor and 16 students will take a long time? It absolutely will. Be easier if 2 tutors could do it. I don't see why not, Dawn, but we will double check just to get that confirmed. Yeah. And then, right. So we're at the end of the questions that were in the chat box. Have I missed anything at all? Has anyone put a question in that I haven't answered? Does anyone know? Or has anybody got any further questions that they might want to pop in or unmute and ask if you'd prefer to ask it in person? Is anything, Janet, that we've talked about that we haven't mentioned today? Is anything else that we've...
I don't think so. It might be interesting to hear if there are any significant challenges. I'm understanding that there's challenges around the invigilation, and when I say challenges, I mean concerns or issues, things that need clarifying. So we can take that on board. Is there anything else? And the Easter holiday session break, I get as well, absolutely. I wondered if there was anything else that you really wanted to feed back through Helen and myself.
Yes, there is actually. When I think about it, one of the questions we were asked on Tuesday was if somebody chooses an EYE employer set project and then they go on to change their mind and do assistant teaching, is that okay? And the answer I've had back from assessment design is yes, that is fine. They do a contextualized employer set project, but if they change specialisms in the second year and have passed the employer set project for a different specialism, they still pass and progress, is what I've been told. So they can change their mind after the employer set project and do a different occupational specialism. It's just the contextualization of it rather than the assessment of that specific occupational specialism. So that was one thing I could share. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's reassuring for centres that are offering both occupational specialisms as a sort of 2 discrete pathways. I think most people are going for one or the other, but there are some centres that are offering both, and so that's quite reassuring there. And I would also say, you know, that in sort of normal times, dare I say it, you know, placement for the early years students would have started, and therefore it would be more likely that that decision had been made. But again, it does allow for that flexibility. So that's good to have that confirmed. Thanks, Helen.
It is. The other thing is I would like to say is that obviously the consultation on the adaptations for the assessment closes tomorrow. I mean, I can share the link to it if you haven't seen it, but I have said to my line manager to feed up through NCFE Cash to the consultation about the possible problems that COVID-19 absences could impact on all of these separate supervised sessions and how they're reliant on each other taking place to move forward. They've got to be finished task 1 before they can do, and the whole cohort's got to be finished task 1 before you can move on to task 2. Will there be any adjustments there? But I have said, that I have highlighted that I think there are some possible problems here if the employer set project goes ahead as it currently is planned. that it could, you know, we don't want to disadvantage anybody, so that we need to make sure that any adjustments that are put into place for the employer set project mirror the needs of the students, but also the situation we're in and the way this assessment is structured, because it is quite bitty. And you know, what happens if a student misses one bit because they have to either self-isolate, or they're poorly, or the teacher has to, you know, what's the knock-on effect? So that is something that we've highlighted to our SLT.
I think that's good. That's really good to hear, Helen, because I think even from the beginning, even from pre-release, where there's a, you know, where we want that parity of accessibility to the resources, then if there isn't that opportunity to access those, you know, then it becomes difficult right from the very beginning. So it's great that that conversation is taking place.
Yeah. Hopefully reassuring. I'm going to move on to the last few slides here, but Janet, I aren't going anywhere, so I'll just run through these last things. As normal, we've reached the end of the session, but I'd like to thank everybody for attending and inputting. The normal takeaway question, this is for your own information, or please share ideas for the benefit of everyone in the chat box. If you have anything that you're taking away specifically from this, please record it or keep it in your mind. And then the action plan, you know, I'm keen for you to see all our CPD sessions as the start of a specific development activity rather than simply a standalone attendance on a webinar. If you're interested in trying out something new, or you'd like more support or guidance about anything you've heard today, we encourage you to get in touch. I'm going to ask again any final questions, queries or ideas. As I say, Janet and I aren't going anywhere yet. If you have any more questions that we haven't got round to yet, or that they've just come into your head, please share them. Here are the forthcoming CPD sessions that Janet and I are involved in from February onwards. And please remember to take a minute to complete the session evaluation. There is a part there to let us know if there are any other CPD ideas or areas you'd like us to cover. Janet, have I got anything else? Oh, one more thing, sorry, there is a standardisation training session on the 24th of February being run by the Quality Assurance team. I think it's preparation for next year. So if you'd like the link for that, please speak to your account exec or contact me, would be appropriate. Victoria, thank you. Action plan, I'll be feeding back to the team at your centre on all of this. Excellent, lovely. Any other takeaways, questions, ideas? Janet, anything from your lovely self?
The only thing I'd like to say is just to echo the thank you. Thanks for your time. To say we appreciate that these are challenging times outside of the norm. New qualifications on top of that, new assessment methodologies on top of that, and you know, the frustrations around not being able to give you a definitive answer now are appreciated. But we will go back and speak to the people that can really confirm these decisions for you. So we will keep you on the straight and narrow, and we will get through this together.
Yeah, absolutely will, and that's what we're here for. We are here for questions. We're here for we're act as an advocate is for you guys. So we will contact the relevant departments to get the answers. I will share the link for the book into the assessment standardisation session. I'm just checking the chat box as we talk. Thanks a lot for that, Leslie, much appreciated. Easter was concern, yes, I can understand that, Victoria. I hadn't thought about Easter, so I will raise that with the powers that be.
Yeah, very good point, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So any other questions, please stay, ask them, pop them in the box, take your mic off. Thank you so much. I'm going to say goodbye to anyone who needs to go, because I know people have got teaching commitments. Stay safe for everyone at NCFE. Thank you so much, and keep in touch with us, please. Oh, sorry, hello Claire, I'm just reading yours. Every time I try to book webinars and I get a confirmation.
Sorry,
oh, isn't that weird?
Hi,
that's weird.
So weird. Sorry, so I've been put.
Go on, sorry, you just can't.
Yes, no, yes, sorry. So I've just been Gemma sent me the link. I hope that's okay, and I've just tagged on. So I think there might be two Gemma's things showing up on.
I wonder why. We're moving from GoToTraining to GoToWebinar, so
okay.
It might sort itself out, but it doesn't matter who you get on as, so long as you get on.
Yeah,
as long as you're here, that's fine. I just want you to have your own. That's not very nice.
No, thank you so much. That was really helpful.
Is that okay? If you have any questions, if it's caused any confusion or you want anything else, please get in touch. I mean, one thing that I realised in preparing this is the whole task is about the activity plan. And that's how I would sell it to students. You're going to do some research about what you might put into a plan. You're going to create the plan. You're going to review it. You're going to talk to your fellow students about it. You're going to talk to them about their plans. And then you're going to talk to your tutor about it. And then you're going to amend it and see what you might do differently, reflect on it. You know, the whole project is about this activity plan, creating it, reviewing it, discussing it. It's, you know, and it sounds very complicated, but if you focus the students on, it's all about this activity plan. It might simplify it.
Yes.
I think that's a good way to sell it, and I don't think it seems scary in that terms. I think for Gemma and I think the thing that we're looking at is how we need to plan it in our normal teaching, who's doing it. Yes. And I teach a lot on the degree programme, so it's then thinking, when is it happening, when are the students in, and is it actually going to take place in the classroom? Is this actually are we going to get back in the classroom to do mocks and things with them? So I think it's all that anxiety at the moment.
Yeah, the logistics and the practicalities of managing it all is, I think, the most complicated bit that we need to get our heads around.
Yeah, that was very useful.
Good.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Helen. Thanks. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for your input. Thank you for your questions. Big thanks. Stay safe.
Hi, Helen. Are you still there?
I'm still here. Yes.
Sorry, it's Jill.
Hello, Jill.
That is my big anxiety at the moment, is this thing about when I should be releasing it. I know I've asked the question and you're going to look back or ask, you know, about the Easter break.
Yeah.
It's just like, you know, it's occurred to me that if we do go back on the 8th, which is a big if, I think, particularly where I live in Havant, which was, you know, one of the big areas. It's not 3 weeks. I put 3 weeks and then I counted again. It's 4 weeks. I know you're a math specialist, so I just let you know. Work that one out.
I just took you in for it.
But you know, I'm sure I'm not alone in this. My students are all attending on their online sessions, but then they're very sort of self-conscious about talking or having the cameras on and all of that sort of thing. So it's quite hard to do mocks for the presentations, not the activity plans. That's, you know, we've been doing that since September, really. But the sort of presenting skills and their communication skills, we've not, you know, that is my big concern, that we're not going to have time to sort of do many practices of those.
I don't know if you've read the consultation has recommendations, what they're currently saying, and what the current recommendation at the moment is that they don't offer the exams in this window, but they still offer the students the opportunity to do the employer set project.
Yeah, that's what I read. I have put my points through.
Good. I mean, my reaction was the other way around. Might be better with all of the COVID restrictions and possibilities going on. But also, even if both of these core assessments were put off till next year, that kind of backloads a lot of assessment and a lot of work for teachers and students. So, you know, it's and we're not going to know anything until the consultation is over and you know, we're told what to do. So it's just trying to get ahead of it and thinking about, well, how could we manage this? I know the window has grown, but you know, there could be all sorts of adaptations and changes made that'll make it more manageable. We're just waiting to see, aren't we? Just waiting to hear. So
no, absolutely. I think, you know, I just would like to know about that 2 weeks Easter break, you know, because I know I've been BTEC before, and I know we couldn't use holidays and things like that within it. So that put, you know, we're a bit like, well, do they have 5 weeks then, or do they have 1 week?
Yes.
That sort of thing.
Yes. What do we do? We will double check. We'll find out for sure. Because we'll definitely find that one out.
Such a good question. You know, Easter always it's because of its ever changing dates. It always catches us out, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
so I think when it was set, it was probably just not a consideration, or Easter hadn't been set or whatever. But it's an incredible point. It's a really good point, because we shouldn't be expecting students to work over that break either. So yeah, good point, well made.
You can't expect them to, even if they do.
No.
But some might be, caring for siblings at the moment and things like that, and others might just have all the time to themselves. So it's parity for them all, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, absolutely right. And we shouldn't expect them to be working over their holidays. So
right. Yeah. Okay, thank you. That would be great.
Thank you so much, Jill.
Okay, no worries. Bye. Thanks for your
Take care now.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Lovely. Bye-bye.
Thanks ever so much, everybody. We'll sign off now. Thank you.